Okay, Ramsey, I thought I'd start out by asking you about your two new books, The Way of the Worm and By the Last of My Skull, both out now with PS Publishing.
They are.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about both of them?
Yes, well, where do we start? Well, let's start with The Way of the Worm,
Yeah.
which is volume 3 of my Lovecraftian Britchester trilogy. I say the Britchester Mythos trilogy, but actually, they're set pretty well entirely on Merseyside around Liverpool,
Yeah.
which I've used now for the best part of 50 years, I suppose, because that's where I was born and grew up. And first volume, Searching Dead, was set in the 1950s, middle one is the 80s, and now this one is something like the present, recently, as it says in the book. And Dominic Sheldrake, who was the narrator and protagonist, his two friends, Jim and Bobby, all now grown up. In fact, they're past pension age, way past that. But the cult of Daemoth in its various forms that they've been combating as best they can, they've suddenly got stronger. And it's now an urban site basically, as things are these days. A cult. It's got an office at the top of a skyscraper in Liverpool. It's interviews on national radio, stuff like this. And it seems that there are very few people other than Dominic are quite alive to how insidious it is. Because of course, to some extent, he's been having visions throughout the trilogy of what it may invoke in some way. And in this book, it certainly does. And that is in fact the climax of the novel, where he finally inhabits the things he's been anticipating, what the future brings. So that's The Way of the Worm. By the Last of My Skull is my latest collection of short stories. I mean, drawn from the last 5-6 years, I suppose. But I think it's unlikely that most people will have encountered all the stories in their first publication. And in any event, what you will never have had before is the illustrations by the wonderful J.K. Potter, who has provided a full page for every story, and indeed a splendid cover as well. I mean, we've worked together since the very early 80s, when he did The Face That Must Die, the first hardcover edition of that, memorable and cold print.
Yes.
And I bear the very logo, which of course he also did for Screen Press. We've worked together over the decades, and I'm delighted to be back with J.K. Pretty soon he's happy as well.
And so to return for a bit to Way of the Worm, so now you've returned to the Lovecraftian horror that you started writing with.
Mm-hmm.
And Britchester Mythos stories, again, you started writing at the beginning of your career.
I did.
So what was it that sparked off this revival of interest?
Well, I've never entirely abandoned it. I did move away pretty determinedly.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's by daylight, really. That was a deliberate attempt to be myself. But even there, something like the Franklin Paragraphs is a Lovecraftian story. But told in a somewhat metatextual way. But every so often I would have another go at doing a Lovecraftian story over the decades. But I've got to say it was my dear old friend Pete Crowther was to some extent responsible, because before the trilogy I actually did a novella, The Last Revelation of Da'aki. I should say instead it was Jenny, my wife and best thing in my life, on whom the vision came on the day that John and Kate Probert got married, in fact, of how Da'aki should really be pronounced. And we can only assume that this was some sort of epiphany. He's been pronounced that way and spelt that way ever since. But Pete had been saying to me that I should do a novella for PS Publishing. And more specifically, he thought I could do a Lovecraftian novella and maybe set in some sort of northern seaboard town, and that dude became The Last Revelation, which basically just I made me feel. Well, first of all, it made me feel that it was worth going back to my roots, But to be honest, the other main reason, perhaps the best reason, is I fundamentally feel that I could do better with that material now than I did back then. And there are some things, I've always regretted that ruining one of Lovecraft's very best unused ideas, which is the one in about the insects, the insects from Shigei, as my story was in that first collection of mine for Arcanauts. Lovecraft had a dream, basically, which he wrote down as I think the last dream he ever recorded in his commonplace book. And there were a lot of ideas there which he never got around to writing, so others, August Earth for one, and later, I was authorised to use some of them. And this particular one, he dreamt he was in a forest somewhere near Providence, I think.
Yeah.
Probably would have been, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And he was always in the forest, and all of a sudden a swarm of insects approached him, and basically because they weren't strictly material to them, penetrated his skull. At which point he immediately began to share their memories, which are these cosmic visions, as only Lovecraft could conjure them up.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful idea. And the point is, because what I ruined in my stories, I made them into giant insects that fly through space in a spacecraft, which wasn't what he meant at all. And so I regretted that for decades. Eventually, I put it into the darkest part of the woods, which I also think is a bit of a Lovecraftian book. It's Lovecraftian in the way that Charles Dexter Ward is, which refers only very much in passing to the mythos. And I used that as a sort of template for that novel. But I did bring in this idea of the swarm of insects that enter your brain. And this time I think, I certainly got it more right than I did in the first place. So really, my motivation is to try and do justice to these ideas.
Yeah. And another unusual thing about it for yourself, but I think for a lot of horror in general, is that it's a trilogy.
Yes.
Which we're much more used to seeing in fantasy and science fiction.
Yes, absolutely. Again, you see, this was Pete. I'm blaming him for everything. Who said, he said basically nobody's written a horror trilogy. Now, not strictly true. There was Claire McNally did the Ghost House trilogy back in the 70s, I think, which, to be honest, I've not read, but it appears to be a trilogy. And of course, between Pete suggesting this to me and my actually doing it, Jeff Vandermeer did the Southern Reach trilogy, which is quite splendid. It was also filmed very finely as Annihilation by Alex Garland. But also, you see, this is the thing, in the case of both that novella, The Last Revelation, and later the trilogy, I was initially resistant because, as far as I can tell, the only reason to write a novella is if there's a reason to write a novella, if it needs to be that length. It mustn't be just a bloated short story or indeed a cut down novel. And so, much more so in the case of a trilogy, I didn't just want to write a big, like 300,000 word novel and chop it into 3 bits. So there had to be a fundamental reason for that structure. And eventually I did think of this thing, which was, starting in the 50s, going then 33 years later, which you may find a significant length, and then again, by implication, 33 years after that, in the 3rd volume, and to follow these characters through their various developments, pretty well their entire lives, really. Yeah. And so that appealed to me, so I did it, basically, and very glad I did.
And that's one of the really striking things about the trilogy, is that you have this really effective look at both the way that Liverpool as a place has changed over those 60-odd years, but also you get a really nice portrayal of characters at these different stages, so we see them as children or adolescents just on the cusp, and we see them when they're in their 30s and just like starting to have kids or whatever, and we also see them at the end of their lives once they're past pension age.
That's right. That was very. I did like that. I mean, to be honest, just in terms of returning to them, because the whole thing was written over 3 years. It was a novel a year. And in between, my usual thing whenever I've written a novel, trilogy or otherwise, is do the first draft, leave it and do some short stories, then come back, reread it, which point I discovered just how much crap it is, basically. And at that point, at that stage, it's basically, I can see all sorts of things needs fixing, but I don't see how. And then after that, I do get to the keyboard, because the first draft was longhand, actually, pen and exercise book, and then once I get to the computer, as it now is used to be the typewriter, everything's up for grabs, and basically I go in there determined to fix everything, and basically challenging everything in it to justify itself. So anything that doesn't gets chucked out or it gets changed, you know. And so, but the point being that was the process for each of these three novels. But actually coming back to the characters again, which is something I've never really done before. Well, just a very occasional passing reference in other stories to previous stories, maybe, but not returning to this whole group of characters, you know, decades later.
Yeah.
That was sort of exciting, and very much a sense of, you know, coming back to old friends, if you like, but also wanting to see how they did change, and also, of course, I always feel a novel, I always write instinctively, if you like. I don't like plotting in advance, not anymore, I used to, but I gather a lot of material, but I don't have a pre-planned structure. And so, because I like the thing to grow organically, I think it gains a lot of momentum that way, and much more so with a trilogy, you know. So it really did have a sort of energy that I was drawing upon, and I can't imagine doing another trilogy, because unless I had a theme that really demanded it, but Dad did it though, that's for sure.
I mean, you do get that ratcheting up through the three books, and like especially by the time you get to the end of the third one, where he is inhabiting the visions that he's been plagued by for his entire life now, it is nice to have that as a payoff.
Yes, I think so. I hope it does pay off, you know, after 300,000 words or a bit less than that, but yeah.
And one of the things about the final volume that links it to some of the short stories about The Last of My Skull is that there's this really sensitive portrayal of these characters in old age. And you talk a lot about, like at the beginning of the book, Dominic's wife has died.
Yeah.
So a lot of the book is about him dealing with that loss and that sense of like isolation from like, you know, his friends are dying off, like his son's world is a completely different world. So,
I mean, you could argue these are sort of autobiographical fears in a way, although oddly enough, the autobiographical aspect of these books is not quite as much as you might think. I know a lot of people have assumed that the school in volume 1, you know, that he goes to, is based on the one I went to. I mean, I did go to Christian Brothers Grammar School, but funnily enough, all the staff in that novel, I mean, there's a page or so, you know, a chapter where you get all the stuff, sketched, basically. And none of those were like the people who actually were teachers at my school. It was one of those strange moments that you get in writing, and they just came sort of unbidden out of my head. And I just sat there and wrote them all. I mean, an hour ago, I didn't know anything about any of them, but by the end of the morning, I knew about all of them. And that's how it works. But I mean, there obviously are autobiographical elements, and particularly that sense of Liverpool is accurate. That is how I remember it as being, you know, and all the sort of details that are in there, you know, how I grew up, what I grew up with.
Yeah. And that runs through the short stories as well, because like, so many of them are set in or around the Liverpool area. So that sense of place, is that something you see as really key?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, I think, I don't think it's even just a setting. I mean, one thing's like, one huge influence, as well as Lovecraft, M.R. James, as well, of course, but the other, or another absolutely crucial influence is Fritz Leiber, very specifically Smoke Ghost, you know, which I've always argued is you know, a radical development in supernatural horror, and urban supernatural horror, where, you know, whereas previously, you know, the familiar environment is invaded by the uncanny. In Smoke Ghost, it's the source of the uncanny, and you know, although certainly, you know, a lot of Lovecraft and you know, earlier work too, is certainly Lovecraft used to say that a lot of his stories were simply trying to convey how a place felt to him, you know, like, you know, very specific about places like Vermont and New England and the like. And very much so in terms of my stories about Merseyside, that's kind of how Liverpool and its environs, you know, feel to me, you know, the stories come directly out of that more often than not.
And I found that what you just said about the the uncanny coming from the familiar. Again, I feel that's a recurring element in a lot of your stories, is that like from something mundane, we get a closer look at it that's just sort of like shifted slightly out of focus, and that's where the horror, the fear comes from.
Absolutely, yes. Well, it's the familiar sort of turning its dark side towards it. Absolutely. I suppose, you know, I tend to argue that one of the purposes of, dare we say, art, I hope we can say that, you know, is to make us look again at things we've taken for granted. And that includes, you know, me, the writer, while writing it, you know, and it's also the purpose of criticism, I think, you know. So I would kind of justify the stories along those lines, really.
And that also brings me to another thing which occurs a lot in your writing, is this ambiguity. Like quite often, the horror is either implied rather than fully described, or there is there is space in the text where, you know, we're so involved in this person's close-up first-person experience of what he's going through. Is it the person going a little bit mad? Is there some general supernatural thing? And there is that level of ambiguity there. So is that something that you find more frightening than something that's explicitly spelled out?
Well, I think disturbing maybe rather than frightening, but yes, I mean, it's certainly something that preoccupies me. It has done me for a very long time. And again, that comes really down to the whole thing of something that appears to be one thing and proves to be something else, which I suppose is something I grew up with, you know, my mother being schizophrenic, basically, you know, undiagnosed, but definitely so. So yes, I think also it would be fair to say that in a lot of the stories, the uncanny element it's not explicable in terms of the psychology. You can't explain it away in terms of the psychology of the characters, but I think, you know, it can be seen as a sort of an aspect of themselves that they have denied, you know, or something of that nature. But I think they're bound together, and I mean, in a lot, I absolutely agree. You know, in a lot of stories, you can't take apart, you know, say this is uncanny, this is psychological. They're interwoven, you know, like I don't know, like some kind of Escher, I don't know.
And again, one of the things about the stories in By the Light of My Skull is there's a frequent use of these northern working class aspects, like most strikingly the one with the bingo hole.
Oh, the corners, yeah. Well, you see that, and also that's the other thing that a lot of my stories come out of, as well as being, you know, as we've said, the set, the places. It's also just it comes down to what we've been talking about, really. You know, the absolutely familiar that all of a sudden looks different to me. You know, just one day. I mean, for heaven's sake, you know, here's a ghastly confession for you. Because I do occasionally watch the Jeremy Kyle show, out of which came the opening chapter of, let me see, of the Kind Folk. In fact.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose when the guy goes on to discover his parentage. But I mean, I don't know if they still are or not, because I'm not often anymore, but they used to be supported by an online bingo site, I think it was, something like that anyway. And so, you know, this bingo ad would show up every so often. And just all of a sudden I thought, well, hang on, you know. And so I think it's just, you know, I thought of, you know, bingo calling and the you know, the phrasings that he used. And all of a sudden I began to imagine a couple that were rather darker and more suggestive. and hence that story, you know. But yes, I mean, as you say, a lot of it, I mean, actually, I'll tell you this, I was very pleased, delighted, really. I mean, no less than Jeremy Dyson, you know, the League of Gentlemen. And he said it was my Northern Uncanny that made him want to write, and thus the League of Gentlemen, you know. So if I could do that, I must be doing something right.
And you also have that story in the collection that deals with the student studying the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yes.
And your love of old films is, I mean, involved in film criticism for a while, and also it's formed your writing before in books like Ancient Images and Print Dark.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in this particular case, man, it was Joe Pulver, the excellent Joe Pulver, the anthologist, who wanted to do a complete collection of short stories in some way around Caligari, the film. And this is how it occurred to me to do it, using the intertitles as part of the narrative, if you like. Yes, I mean, mind you, first guy to do it was Basil Copper, wasn't he? Amber Print is a story about Basil Copper, which is about Caligari. So he was ahead of that game. But no, I love the cinema in all its form, I mean, not simply, I love horror films, but all manners of film, and indeed, perhaps we could just say, we did say this at the launch of those two books, but I'll say it again since it's now public, that something you might not expect me to be doing is a monograph on the Three Stooges for PS, for Electric Dream House, their film criticism arm. And I think Snow White and the Three Stooges will probably be the jumping off point, but it will be going in many, many directions. And not least, I shall be arguing my case for the fact that the first horror film to show the influence of the Three Stooges is not Evil Dead, although most certainly it does, but The Shining.
Okay, I'll have to think about that.
Read the book. Read the book. It's not out yet, not even written yet, but that I will tell you.
So, how do you feel that your love of cinema influences your writing?
Well, generally not in terms of actual specific influence by films, although the exceptions are probably back in early on. There were two films that were two of the very first foreign films I ever saw in my sort of mid-teens. I saw Buñuel's Los Olvidados, which is sadly not that easy to come by at the moment. I very much hope somewhere right now Criterion or somebody like working on a Blu-ray restoration. I'm sure it must come. And Los Olvidados is early 50s set in Mexico City about street gangs, basically. And I mean, it makes City of God look pale by comparison. Even now, Buñuel, obviously, he was originally a surrealist who worked with Salvador Dali. And still nobody does it. Nobody goes for the sort of chill, like the shock, like Buñuel. And this is nominally a neo-realist film. At times it pushes the realism so far that it almost sort of spills over into surrealism. And there's a dream in the middle of it, which typically Buñuel is not indicated as a dream. It's like, there's no kind of wavering of the screen or anything like that. You just, next shot, here we are, and suddenly you realise something is terribly wrong. But again, the dream is completely naturalistic. And that's sort of suggested to be ways of, interleaving the completely realistic and the uncanny. And the other film, which again I love and I've seen many times, because I do have a copy of Los Olvidados actually, but it's an okay DVD. But Last Year in Marienbad, the Alain Resnais, one of the great enigmas of cinema, and supremely haunting and supremely disturbing film, which opens a variety of interpretations. But what he does with that, though, basically is he annihilates time in the ordinary sense. So, the editing, it's done, it's familiar now, but by God, it was not in 1961. That, you would follow a shot that might follow without any kind of indication. One shot would be followed by another that would take place a year earlier, let's say, or might not be taking place at all, depending on how you interpret the film. And René's editing technique was hugely influenced the way I did some of the stuff in Demons by Daylight, particularly Concussion, something called Concussion, which is sort of a time travel story. And there are a couple of points in that where you skip back several decades in the middle of a sentence, and that was my attempt to do René in prose.
And coming back to the Three Stooges,
yes.
Your work does have a humour element in it, particularly something like The Count of 11, which is all about that balance between funny and absolutely horrific.
Well, you see, a couple of things on that. First of all, my favourite review of all time, I think it was The Telegraph, said if Stan Laurel had been a serial killer, this might have been the story. So I can't have a better compliment than that. But the other thing I think about kind of 11 is that the reason I still call it a horror story is because it doesn't stop being funny when you feel it really ought to stop, you know? You see what I mean? And it occurs to me, I mean, the other huge influence on a writer I enormously about Nabokov, and Lolita was the first of his books I read all the rest I could lay my hands on. But I mean, in Lolita is a classic instance of a book that really ought to be funny about what it's funny about, you know? Not least the murder, the killing of Quilty, you know, the narrator's kind of, in a way, nemesis, you know. But it is, it's sort of extremely blackly comic. And so I'm sure that's the influence there. I mean, I suppose something like, I don't know, Needing Ghosts or The Good of the Dark, you know. I would actually call comedy of paranoia. I can't pretend to have invented that, I mean, maybe Kafka did. But I suppose maybe I've sort of brought it more into our field. So I'm quite happy with that. It makes me laugh anyway. What can I say?
So do you feel that there is that link between horror and humour?
Oh gosh, many a link, yes. I mean, that's some obvious things like, you know, both depend on timing, for instance, you know, in their effects. But also, I think, you know, it's odd that you don't get this strange shading that, on the one hand, I think probably nothing is funnier than a really bad horror movie.
Yes.
I mean, which is not to denigrate Ed Wood, because I love Plan 9. Well, that's slightly more science fictional, but, you know, it's inexhaustible, it's very, very funny. But on the other hand, there's this other strange thing that sometimes comedy can sort of shade over into horror, even when it's supposed to be funny. I mean, if Christ, funny enough, coming back to Jeremy Dyson, I mean, the League of Gentlemen seems to me to be horror fiction disguised as comedy, sometimes only very barely disguised. Sometimes the mask pretty well slips off, doesn't it? I mean, even, I mean, heaven's sake, I remember as a kid going to see a Danny Kaye movie called Knock on Wood, where he's a ventriloquist, within whose dummy a spy has secreted some microfilm and then has to come and get it back. Now, Guy breaks into his London flat, into Danny Kaye's London flat, but the member of the other side, the bad guys, kills him, actually pins him to a door with a knife. And so there's basically this corpse hanging on the back of the door with a knife in it. And the gag is, Danny Kaye comes home, how long would it take him to realize that's not a killer at the back of the door? And everybody in the cinema, so I think it was probably about 10, was rolling, kind of laughing immoderately. And I was kind of crouching in my seat in absolute terror. So, you know, the line can be very, very thin.
Okay, and so what else do you have coming out at the moment?
Well, gosh, I have to tell you, it's a very productive month or two, you know, not all of which is absolutely new. But Flame Tree Press, the splendid Don Doria, who used to be with Leisure, and then Sam Hain, and Flame Tree Publishing have actually started a horror line, which, you know, is very heartening, you know, because most publishers don't have them as such these days, but they're doing simultaneous hardcover and paperback, both sides of the Atlantic, and simultaneous ebook and audio as well, their own audio arm. And they've just done 13 Days by Sunset Beach, and imminent is Think Yourself Lucky, and then we'll have The Hungry Moon and The Nameless early in the new year. And they all look pretty splendid, so good for them, I'd say. And the other thing I've done is I've edited for the Folio Society. I was delighted to, you know, they approached me to do their horror anthology, and my mission there was basically to, you know, well, it was much more complicated than you think it's going to be when you accept the commission, you know. Because what I wanted to do on the one hand was, you know, do the classics for a large audience which wouldn't necessarily know them. So, you know, we have to have Poe, and we have to have Blackwood and Macklin, Lovecraft, M.R. James and so on, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Shirley Jackson, and so forth. But also, I wanted to try and put in a few that even the aficionado might not know. I was delighted at some of the reviews that have come out of the, you know, out of the specialty critics, do say, they haven't read that particular story before, so it
yeah.
seems to have worked. It also is very splendidly illustrated too.
Yeah.
It's a great job. So, I may look more productive at the moment than in fact I am, but I'm still pretty productive.
And just to finish off, what's coming next?
Well, apart from the Three Stooges book, which I haven't started yet, because I must look at all the films again, that's part of the process. But right now, I've done the first draft of a new novel called The Wise Friend, and I've just started rereading the first draft, and I've reached that position of basically seeing just how much crap is in there. But these days, rather than being dispirited, I kind of feel that once you see a problem, you're on the way to solving it. So, and believe me, by the time it's rewritten, it'll be worth PS's time, and yours too. I hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Jonathan, thank you. Great interview, man. Thank you.